Welcome to Military Analytics. The war between Russia and Ukraine has gotten more and more interesting every day. The historic defeat of Russian soldiers is on the agenda of the whole world today. New videos from the battlefield went viral. The Russian army is disgraced all over the world. So why are Russian soldiers failing? What was actually happening in the video that has been watched millions of times? The Ukrainian army has been showing a very strong resistance since the start of the war on February 24, 2022. According to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, a total of 108,190 soldiers have died in the Russian army. Putin is having a very difficult time due to these huge losses. The whole world was surprised that the Russian army suffered such a huge loss. The Ukrainian army is using advanced drones to record videos of many operations on the battlefield and shared them with the press. In these videos, it is very clear how badly the Russian soldiers are failing. In one of these videos, Russian soldiers are seen drinking beer on a tank. The soldiers are lying on the tank drunk as a result of the operations of Ukrainian drones. These tanks were destroyed. All the drunk soldiers around the tanks are dead. This was not the only case of drunken Russian soldiers. It turned out that the Russian soldiers drinking in a cafe in Kherson, a city occupied by Russia and Ukraine, had clashes with Russian intelligence service officials. This incident became more talked about after some investigation files in the Russian army were leaked to the press. According to reports, Russian intelligence officials found Sergeant Zaporizhzhia Bukov and Staff Sergeant Igor Sudin, two contracted soldiers in the Russian army, drinking in their uniforms in the cafe. It is strictly forbidden for Russian soldiers to drink alcohol in official uniform. Russian intelligence service officials gave the soldiers a stern warning. However, the soldiers responded with weapons. Soldiers of the 8th Artillery Regiment of the Black Sea Fleet opened fire on Bukov intelligence officers. Then one intelligence officer Privado tried to reach for his weapon. Russian soldiers stood and fired at the intelligence officials with an AK-74 rifle. Intelligence officials clashed between the two soldiers. As a result of this clash, one intelligence officer and two soldiers died. In another incident, a Russian soldier is seen hitting a wall with a tank. In Volgograd, Russia, an alcoholic soldier destroyed the wall of an airport with an armored vehicle. The moments when the allegedly drunk soldier destroyed the perimeter wall of the airport with an armored vehicle were reflected on the airport security camera. An investigation was launched into the incident. This is not all the problems Russian soldiers have after getting drunk. A Russian soldier got drunk and started sleeping after consuming too much alcohol in a liquor store. The soldier did not leave the liquor store for days under the influence of alcohol. The Ukrainian army organized an operation in this town and all the Russian soldiers fled. But the soldier sleeping in the alcohol store was unaware of these developments. The Ukrainian army was surprised to catch the Russian soldiers sleeping among the bottles of alcohol. Russian soldiers have a lot of problems with alcohol addiction. These incidents have caused a crisis in the Russian army. It is claimed that the Russian General Staff punished the commander in the region due to the soldiers' undisciplined behavior. There are constant arguments between Russian commanders. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry published a report on Russian losses following these operations. According to this data, 750 soldiers died in the Russian army in the last 24 hours. It has been a very difficult day for the Russian army. After this huge loss, the Russian leadership started to panic even more. The debate is growing about the cause of the disorganization in the Russian army. The Russian army is completely out of order. This leads to many strange events, having suffered a major defeat against Ukraine. Russia has sent prisoners to the battlefield. These prisoners think that war is a game because of their irresponsible and undisciplined behavior. The Russian army is completely out of order. These prisoners are also harming other soldiers in the Russian army. There are constant problems between Russian soldiers. On the other hand, the Russian commanders are having huge conflicts because of this war. Most Russian commanders want to withdraw from this war, but the Russian General Staff refuses to withdraw from this war. This is causing many tensions within the army. The Russian army is suffering heavy losses in Ukraine. Putin made the biggest mistake of his political career by invading Ukraine. None of Putin's plans for this war have succeeded. The Ukrainian army is foiling Putin's plans one by one. According to experts, the Kremlin leadership now knows that it cannot win this war. Russia's trying to buy time during the winter months. Once the winter is over, Russia may withdraw from Ukraine completely. It is known that the Ukrainian army is preparing for much more extensive operations if Russia refuses to withdraw. The Ukrainian army attaches great importance to liberating the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and Crimea. Ukraine is expected to launch operations in both of these regions once the winter is over. Russia does not have the power to fight against these operations. Russia will have to be defeated or withdraw from this war completely. As a result of these tensions, the failure of the Russian army is increasing. Russia has been forced to withdraw from most of the territories it occupied. No one believes that Russia can win this war anymore. The Ukrainian army also continues its operations during the winter season and continues to prepare for the post-winter period. The HIMARS used by the Ukrainian army are very effective with a range of 80 kilometers. These missiles can operate successfully even on the coldest winter days. The Orm drones used by the Ukrainian army can also fly in winter. Everyone knows that these drones have a serious advantage on the battlefield. The drones can fly even in snowy weather, and thanks to their advanced cameras, they can detect and destroy all the movements of the Russian army. The most severe reflections of the Ukrainian war are experienced in the Baltic Sea. With the decision of Sweden and Finland to join the NATO alliance, the Baltic Sea is preparing to close its doors to Russia completely. So is this possible? Will Russia agree to completely lose its dominance in the Baltic, where one of its biggest ports, St. Petersburg, is located? Or will he get into new elbow contact with NATO, as he has done for a long time? Let's take a closer look at the latest developments in the Baltic Sea and NATO's plan to completely imprison in its port in the Baltic. As you know, Estonia's Tallinn and Finland's Helsinki ports are mutually located in a strait in the Baltic Sea. This strait opens into the port of St. Petersburg, Russia's most important port in the Baltic and its only coast. A power that can be created in this strait can completely destroy Russia's moves in the Baltic Sea. In Estonia these days, they started to take a step towards this. As a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Estonia has begun to seriously consider the possibility of effectively blocking the passage of Russian ships from the Baltic Sea and appears to be taking the necessary steps. The practice of contiguous territory up to 12 nautical miles from Estonia's 12-mile territorial waters allows the country to search military vessels and civilian vessels in the Gulf of Finland to monitor compliance with Estonian laws. Currently, the Gulf of Finland within this region is designed to leave a 3-mile wide corridor for free navigation, and Estonia will officially close this corridor by declaring it a contiguous zone. In fact, this means the naval blockade of St. Petersburg, one of the most powerful ports in the Russian Federation, as well as the others in the Leningrad Oblast, and the blockade of the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Federation. So what consequences could this have? We can understand this issue much better by taking a look at the recent structuring in the Baltic Sea because of its strategic breadth and opportunities for covert action. The maritime domain has become the most prominent arena of great power competition. Today, in the shadow of this conflict and Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the Baltic Sea has now become the focal point of geopolitical interests and conflicts. One expression of this is the rise in hybrid activity, from acts of sabotage to the use of unidentified drones for Western states, in particular in the Baltic Sea region. All this underlines their dependence on fossil resources, critical maritime infrastructure, and secure trade routes. In response to the war against Ukraine and Russian naval activities in the Baltic Sea, the coastal states put their armies into a state of increased readiness. In the midst of this crisis situation, NATO allies and future allies made new preparations during the Cold War. The Baltic Sea was defined by the Warsaw Pact as the Sea of Peace. In its own interpretation, this definition included the claim of a mayor's rule geopolitically, based on the fact that the Baltic Sea was the sea of origin of Soviet naval aspirations. In effect, the Baltic Sea was divided into the Warsaw Pact-controlled area, east of the island of Fehmarn, and the NATO-controlled area west of Fehmarn, into the Skidrock, Denmark. The Federal Republic of Germany and Norway secured their approach to the Baltic Sea. Moreover, in the Baltic Sea, with the two non-aligned states, Sweden and Finland, there was an area of geostrategic importance for the control of important sea lines in an area dominated by the Warsaw Pact. As such, it could have been the target of Soviet aggression, but was not explicitly considered in NATO's defense plans. However, Based on their historical experience with the Soviet Union, both states had early established combat-ready forces with full defense concepts and full community security readiness to provide deterrence and resilience. The geographic region of the eastern Baltic Sea, bordered by Sweden and Finland, provided a strategic military gateway to advance behind the Iron Curtain in case of military conflict. In contrast, a divided Germany and the adjacent Baltic Sea were a potential front line of military escalation between the Warsaw Pact and NATO in the Baltic Sea. The Soviet Union, along with Poland and the GDR, had numerical maritime advantages with its submarines, destroyers, corvettes, fast patrol boats, amphibious assets, and mine layers. NATO believed it had little to counter the Warsaw Pact supremacy in a conflict situation. Therefore, Soviet occupation of most of Denmark, southern Norway, and northern Germany was expected in the first days of a possible conflict. From the Soviet point of view, the main strategic bottleneck was an area and around southern Norway. This was the place where the naval communication lines leading to the operational and deployment areas of the strategic units of the Warsaw Pact passed, and the access points of the Russian ships and submarines of the Northern Fleet to the North Atlantic, to the north. In this region, there was fear of NATO interfering with Russian sea lanes. However, the changing order has completely destroyed this order in recent years. It created new realities in the region. The geostrategic reality has fundamentally changed in recent years. Reasons for this include the consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, the neo-imperial Russian foreign and security policy emerging in the ongoing offensive against Ukraine, and the planned NATO membership of Sweden and Finland. Today, the Baltic and North Seas are part of the larger geostrategic Arctic North Atlantic area that extends to the Black Sea as an area of operation for Russia. This area is part of Moscow's European strategy, in which it seeks to establish an economic and security zone from the Atlantic to the Pacific and take a central controlling position with Sweden and Finland joining NATO. The Baltic Sea will be surrounded by NATO member states, except for two regions around Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. The redeclared goal of establishing Russian naval power in 2022, with the promulgation of Russia's new naval doctrine, would no longer be possible in this strategically important region. If Norway had been a potential link between geostrategically important reference points from the Soviet Union's point of view during the Cold War, from Russia's point of view, this would now be the territory of the Baltic states from the Gulf of Finland to the Suwalki corridor. This includes the Swedish island of Gotland and the Danish island of Bornholm. Vital maritime communication lines pass through the region. Control of this area will be a military priority for all parties in a conflict that can no longer be ignored. This was most recently made visible to the general public when 3 Russian landing craft from the Northern Fleet first entered the Baltic Sea in early January 2022 and were refueled in Kaliningrad. After being refueled and equipped, they sailed along with 3 other landing craft of the Baltic Fleet in the sea area between Kaliningrad and Gotland in the following days. Sweden was so panicked that it immediately increased its military presence on the island, which it has continued to expand and consolidate to this day when Sweden and Finland joined NATO. The alliance's forces will be able to more easily monitor and control critical sea lines of the Baltic Sea. The Baltic states, as well as Bornholm and Gotland in the central Baltic Sea, are becoming increasingly important from a strategic point of view for Russia's access to the Kaliningrad enclave. Gotland will facilitate NATO's potential control of the Baltic Sea region, while Kaliningrad will become a burden for Russia, a country whose fleet does not have free access to its bases and sea lanes cannot be a naval power. Under the Maritime Convention Act of the International Maritime Organization, a subsidiary of the United Nations, Russia has the legitimate right to use vital maritime communication lines in the Baltic Sea to its territory. But in the event of an armed conflict, this can change dramatically. Especially the strategy put forward by Estonia may completely block the waves in Petersburg. This means the destruction of the Russian Navy in the Baltic. It also means the end of Russian trade in this region before the war. Maritime cargo traffic passing through St. Petersburg exceeded 300 million tons per year. In recent months, Russia has been rehearsing to move smaller warships equipped with similar weapons. The sea route does not end in St. Petersburg. It continues through rivers, lakes, and canals in the north to the White Sea and south into the heart of Russia. Using this route, Russia recently conducted an exercise with caliber cruise missiles in the Baltic Sea. This is one of the main reasons why Estonia closed the strait in the Baltic Sea. The Russian Navy is indisputably trying to advance in the most exhausted state of recent years. For this reason, they know that they cannot oppose the NATO force, no matter how strong they are in the Baltic. At least Putin cannot afford to open a front in the Baltic right now. For this reason, he follows developments in the Baltic with a quiet but threatening attitude. If yesterday Ukrainians cleared up to 1 kilometer of trenches on the northern Bakhmut flank, then today, Ukrainians liberated 3 square kilometers on the southern Bakhmut flank. The day started with Prigozhin's announcement that Ukrainians launched a powerful counterattack south of the Ivanovsky Highway Bridge, the Russian defense, and penetrated it by half a kilometer already by 10 a.m. He said that he received numerous messages from his soldiers, saying that the Russian 72nd Brigade abandoned their positions and ran away the moment they saw Ukrainian tanks and armored fighting vehicles. He also said that the Russian Ministry of Defense deceived him and after the first day cut off supplies. Once again, Prigozhin raised the alarm and said that now the Wagner Group is not only with no ammunition, but also with bare flanks, which Ukrainians will definitely try to capitalize on to launch the counteroffensive. Closer to the evening, the Ukrainian side confirmed that almost everything Prigozhin said is true and showed combat footage where Russian soldiers are indeed abandoned in their positions and running away before Ukrainian assault units even reach their positions. It looks like the emotional buildup of anxious anticipation of the Ukrainian counteroffensive broke the Russian spirit, and they thought that staying on the zero line is a sure death. Nonetheless, Ukrainian fighters also reported that at least 20% of troops belong not to regular army, but to the Wagner Group, and that they abandoned their positions and ran together. The assault was conducted by the fighters from the 3rd Assault Brigade. As you might still remember, these were the fighters that broke the momentum of the Russian advancement in the Crimea region and cleared a lot of trenches. Soon they were relocated to an unspecified area, which turned out to be the southern flank. Ukrainians assaulted Russian trenches with tanks and armored vehicles and eliminated those who did not flee, which amounted to 64 troops when the report came out and is likely higher now as the operation continues. As a result, Ukrainians completely eliminated the second Russian bridgehead on the western side of the canal. Previously, Russians also had another bridgehead near the forest, which Ukrainians eliminated around a month ago. Prigozhin was furious at the 72nd Brigade. He said that his army lost 500 men to establish a powerful bridgehead. The positions were ready, and all the 72nd Brigade needed to do was to use the trenches and hold the defense. But in one day they lost half of it because of the collapse in front line. Gazprom's private military company refused to go to these positions as they did not want to deal with the falling apart front. The problems on the flanks exacerbated the difficulties that Wagner forces are facing in the city itself. To night, Ukrainian soldiers reported that they noticed that Russians started moving into the gray zone, which made the Ukrainians expect a huge storm in operation during the night. However, it did not happen because of the extensive HIMARS raid across the whole Bakhmut direction. It was reported that Ukrainians district, multiple ammunition depots, forces and equipment concentrated rapidly, creating shortages. These shortages likely forced the Wagner Group to reconsider its plans and go on the defensive, especially given the high level of uncertainty and the necessity to face the imminent large-scale mechanized assault or the counteroffensive operation.